Hello, Professor Radhakrishna. This is a research field paper session.
Yeah, yeah.
You and Dr. KVS are session chairs. Uh, in the list of the papers, you can tell the author names. We will bring them onto the stage and they'll present the papers.
Yeah. There are two research full papers in this today's session. First one is the sizing and coordinated scaling of microservices, authored by Prish Agarwal and Jay Lakshmi from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And the presenting author is Prish Agarwal. So, can you please admit Prish Agarwal onto the stage?
Yes, I'm bringing Prayashi. Welcome, Prayashi.
Yeah. Good
Sure.
morning, Priyashi. Yeah.
Good morning,
Now,
sir.
yeah, you can start it, share your presentation, and then start your topic.
Sure, sir. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you have the like a 15 minutes time for spending and 5 minutes for Q&A.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Stage is yours.
So please let me know when you can just see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen and you are audible.
Okay,
Please
sir.
go ahead.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. Okay. Hello, everyone. Greetings of the day to everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining CSIM 2020. And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much. I'm Priyasha Agrawal from ISC Bangalore, India. Today, I'll be presenting my work on sizing and coordinated scaling of microservices. This work has been done under the guidance of my advisor, Dr. J. Lakshmi. The major outline of the presentation is as such. I'll start by introducing microservices and some of its important features like independent scaling, low provisioning time, etc. Then by motivating the need to optimize the sizing and scaling algorithms, I'll be discussing the work in majorly two parts. First is a sizing algorithm which would exploit workload characterization and trends in workload pattern in order to achieve resource cost optimization. Then I'll discuss the need of coordinated scaling algorithm to achieve better performance. And lastly, I'll be discussing the results which would provide us with some valuable insights. Let us consider an application in traditional monolithic architecture as shown in the figure. Say this application has three components. As the request rate increases, one more instance of the application is scaled up. We can see that this may lead to wastage of resources as not all the components gets the increase in the request. This can be overcome using the microservice architecture because microservices are small, independent, and loosely coupled services. We can see that only the component which is getting an increase in the request rate is scaled as opposed to the entire application in monolithic architecture. Using microservices, individual components can be scaled according to the demand variations. This also enables the mixing of different sizes catering to the demands. Now, as we discussed, that scaling is an important factor in microservices. Scaling with inappropriate sizes can lead to issues such as overallocation or underallocation, which could lead us to the issues such as wastage of resources in case of overallocation and performance loss in case of underallocation. So we can see that there is a need for a proper sizing and scaling algorithm in order to avoid such scenarios. In the state of art, many scaling algorithms have been proposed. Let's discuss a few. Here we have classified the works based on different aspects as shown in the table, which are reactive proactive, workload characterization, which is nothing filing, workload prediction, and the use of local or global view. So what do I mean by local or global view? If the sizing algorithm makes its scaling decisions based only on the current scheduling interval, then we say that it is global view. It is local view. Sorry. On the other hand, if the algorithm uses the future workload as well in order to make current scaling decisions, then we say it is global view. So authors in 2 have used a statistical method to find resource to scale with. It is reactive in nature, doesn't consider workload characterization nor the workload prediction, and uses the local view. Authors in 3 have used an artificial and recurrent neural network while being proactive in nature, doesn't consider the workload characterization, but does workload prediction. We can see that they also consider the local view. In our previous work, we have proposed a look-ahead algorithm, which is proactive, considers workload characterization and workload prediction, along with considering the global view. While the algorithm tries to find the right size of the microservice to scale with, since this heuristic considers brute force method of finding the look-ahead durations, it is less feasible for the real-time decision making. So in order to remove such drawbacks, which we just discussed, let's see what should be the characteristics of the sizing algorithm, which is capable of taking more real-time sizing decisions while finding the right size to scale with. So first and foremost, the main goal of the sizing algorithm should be resource cost optimization. To achieve this, the workload characteristics is required to understand the nature of the application and also the workload pattern to estimate the future demands. Also, we have observed that considering future workload to make current scaling decisions can help us achieve better cost optimization as opposed to considering the local view. This figure shows a sample workload pattern of a microservice. The entire workload is divided into scheduling intervals, shown with the gray lines. In order to find the right combination of the microservice containers to scale with, a straightforward approach is to consider all the combinations over time for all the scheduling intervals and then find the combination with minimal resource cost. But the issue is that this is computationally very expensive, which kind of makes it impractical to use in real time. So there is a need for a sizing algorithm which considers workload characteristics, workload pattern, considers the future workload to achieve resource cost optimization while making the real-time decisions. In this work, we have proposed a heuristic algorithm which combines the scheduling cycles as groups based on the trends in the workload pattern and then tries to optimize the resource cost within each group and hence for the entire workload pattern as a whole. The groups can be seen in the figure bounded by black lines where the optimization would be done. So let us see how such groups are actually formed in the proposed demand train variation, that is DVM model, and a variation of DVM which considers migration as well. So the DVM algorithm focuses on finding the temporal groups of scheduling intervals in the workload pattern. This is done to achieve resource cost optimization with low computational complexity. So the first step is smoothing the workload pattern, then finding the groups of similar rates of growth of workload pattern. Also, the algorithm avoids smaller groups, which makes it almost a greedy algorithm, which uses local view. And the algorithm also avoids the larger groups, which could make the algorithm more computationally expensive. This is achieved with the help of thresholds. Then the algorithm tries to optimize the resource cost within these derived groups individually and thereby covering the entire workload. Another variation of the DVM algorithm is DVMM, where migration is also considered, but it incurs some additional migration costs. Now let's discuss some of the important results while we compare the DVM with greedy and LA and DVMM with greedy with migration and LAMM algorithm. Greedy is termed to all those algorithms which only considers the local view or current scheduling cycle while making the sizing decisions. LA and LAMM algorithm is our previously proposed algorithm which is brute force in nature and is a bit computationally expensive. The results are shown for two applications which are e-commerce and social network application, which is part of a Death Star benchmark suite which have been proposed. The above two figures compares the DVM with greedy and LA algorithm, and the below two figures compares the LAMM with greedy migration GMMA and LAMM algorithm. Through these results, we can observe that DVM algorithm is better than the greedy algorithm as it considers the global view. Also, DVM shows near optimal results along with faster computation. We can also observe that better results are achieved with smaller scheduling intervals as the resource could be better aligned with the changing workload pattern. Lastly, for DVMM algorithm, higher efficacy is observed for higher migration cost, which is nothing but the extra cost incurred due to the migration from one set of containers to another set of containers. This is because the DVMM algorithm considers the rise and fall of the workload pattern and makes appropriate sizing decisions, while greedy algorithm does not incurring the additional migration costs. Sometimes it may happen that the allocations made by these algorithms result in similar resource cost, which is because of the nature of the workload. Moving further, while sizing algorithm to optimize resource cost is one of the part of the goal, but the second part focuses on the scaling algorithm in order to achieve the performance benefits along with the optimal resource cost. This can be achieved using the coordinated scaling. The scaling algorithm is motivated from the fact that though microservices have an ability to scale independently, but they are still part of an application, which is also highlighted in various works, as we can see. These correlations can be exploited to improve performance as the microservices can be scaled in a coordinated fashion. Thus, this work proposes an algorithm that considers microservice workload characterization, future workload, and microservices correlation for scaling to achieve not only resource cost optimization, but also the performance benefits. So the coordinated scaling algorithm, in order to get all the correlations or exploit all the correlations, it uses two types of correlations, which are microservice use case based correlation and usage based application function correlation, in order to find the request rate of the particular microservice. Microservice use case based correlation can be better understood by considering the figure. It shows the example of an e-commerce application, which is divided into various components like authentication, browse, search, select, etc. The figure shows an enlarged image of the browse functionality, where microservice 1, 2, and 3 creates a workflow when the browse request comes from the user. This creates a microservice use case based correlation where one microservice is scaled might lead to the scaling of the other microservices in the workflow as well. This is what we term as microservice use case based correlation. Another type of correlation, which is usage based application function correlation, can be seen when different functionalities of the applications are related to each other. So let me explain this further. Let's take an example where a user authenticating would probably send a browse request or a search request next. So any change in the request rate of the authentication microservice would lead to, or would probably lead to, or affect the request rate of the browse or search functionality, leading to the correlation among them. So all these type of correlations can be modeled and determined. So not just the microservice use case based correlation or application function based correlations can be individually done, or they both can be actually modeled and determined in terms of a probabilistic model, which could then be exploited to find the workload of a microservice that is then used by the coordinated scaling algorithm. We use probabilistic models and the workloads from the existing work to achieve coordinated scaling of microservices. We consider two applications. One is the e-commerce and one is the social network application, which is part of a DeadStar benchmark suite framework. Having the workloads as shown in the figure, which are derived from the work 8 and 9. The workload shown in these figures is used as the workload at the initial entry point, which is nothing but the first type of request a client sends, acting as an initial entry point of the application. The load on the rest of the microservices is distributed using the probabilities with a standard deviation of 10 to 20%. With the workload in hand, let's observe the results of the coordinated scaling of both the e-commerce and social network application. Figure shows coordinated scaling as opposed to the independent scaling. We have used DVM sizing algorithm to find the sizes of the microservice, as we have already seen the benefits of using DVM algorithm for resource cost optimization. The hashed bars of the figure shows the resource cost of the application, while the solid bars depicts the performance degradation of the application. The lower the value of the performance degradation, the better the algorithm would be. We can see that there is a significant save in the performance in coordinated scaling as opposed to the independent scaling. This is because coordinated scaling proactively allocates sufficient resources to avoid performance loss using the correlation probabilistic model. The resource cost of the coordinated scaling algorithm is almost similar or slightly higher, which is due to the reason that coordinated scaling proactively observes the increase in the workload pattern of the microservice and allocates accordingly, which in turn saves the performance. Also, we can see that microservice 1 of e-commerce and microservice 1 of the social network application have the same resource cost and performance degradation as their initial entry point of the application, and thus the same models in both coordinated and independent scaling. So I'll conclude this talk with a few key points. Microservices are small, loosely coupled services which can scale independently. Also, lower cost can be achieved by considering global view or the future workload. We propose DVM algorithm, which helps in making the quicker real-time sizing decisions with cost optimization. And lastly, we discuss the coordinated scaling of microservices, which gives better performance as opposed to independent scaling. Some of the future directions of the work are using dynamic functional probability model for coordinated scaling would be an interesting scenario to explore. Another interesting direction could be to exploit coordinated scaling where various sizing algorithms like homogeneous or heterogeneous sizing are exploited in an application. These are some of the references we have used in our presentation. Hope this presentation was informative and helpful to all of you. Thank you. I'm open for questions now.
Anyone from attendees have questions for Priyashi? If you would like to come on stage and speak, please raise your hand, or you can also type question in chat.
Yeah, there is one question in the chart.
Yeah.
I think by Professor K.V. Subramanian. What is the size of the cluster on which this experiment was carried out?
So the experiment was actually simulated, and we had three major systems. The size was around one server was having the size of 10 to 12 CPUs with I guess 1 TB or 2 TB of enough space. So we had about 3 clusters as such, and that's where the experiment was performed.
Okay. Another question: how do probabilities change when a microservice is part of multiple use cases?
Okay, so multiple part of use cases, as in the part of different components, is that what being referred to?
Let me rephrase the question. So, Rishi, nice presentation. So, one question I have is, the whole concept of the microservice is that microservice can be reused across different flows, right?
Yes.
Browse, whether you are trying to authenticate, let's say authenticating a user.
Yes.
Authenticating a user could be part of a browse flow, it could be part of a buy flow.
Yes.
Right? So,
yes.
In order to decide that you want to scale the only the authenticate user microservice, you have to consider probabilities coming in from both these.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Both these. So
yes,
how do you decide this?
Okay, sir. So actually, when you create a probabilistic model, what you do is you consider the request rate which are coming to that particular microservice. So if you have a particular microservice which is part of different components, what you'll have is a combination of all these probabilities, right? So what you do is you actually consider if one part of the one component, let's say the authentication is actually getting an increase in the request rate, and some microservice which is part of authentication, and let's say some XYZ like component also. So only the part, only the authentication is something which is actually getting the increase in the request rate. So in that case, what we'll see is when we try to derive the request rate, in the part, we consider both the probabilities in order to find the request rate of that particular microservice which is shared among these different components. And when one of the request rate increases, we actually get the increased request rate from that with some probability, and the rest of the components would get the request rate from the other components would be the same because I think it's not increasing or it's not creating an impact. So whatever the microservice is actually having an impact would be actually transferred to the utility microservice. Let's say it's a utility microservice which is being shared among different components. So what we did is there's a microservice which we tried to share between different components. So what we have observed is, let's say the probability is some x, and for the other for the other component, it's actually having a probability of y of getting the request rate. So you'll have the increase in the request rate with the probability x. So the increased component has already come, and the request rate from the another microservice is coming with the probability of y. So that's how, with the probabilistic model, you can actually include both these scenarios, even if it's an increase, not just an increase. If there's a decrease, that also gets reflected. So what you'll have, whatever request comes, anyway, the utility microservice would, or that the microservice which is actually getting shared, would get the request rate and it would process, right? So as long as you get the request rate in hand, you can actually manage those with the help of probability. So that's something which we tried with. I hope I answered your question, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Preyashi. So we'll move on to the next, because of the time, we will move to the next paper.
Sure.
And the next paper is on energy efficiency for HDFS. The others are Abhishek Das, Bhargav SNV, Sanket N. Reddy, and Prahad Chandra. All are from the PES University, Bangalore. Can I request to Bhargav onto the stage? Admit Bhargav onto the stage. Bhargav is the speaker.
Sure. Just a moment. Bhargav, yeah, he's on stage.
Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Hi, Bhargav. Good morning. Please share your presentation and go ahead about your talk.
Yes.
And the given time is like 15 minutes, so you can complete, and 5 minutes can be reserved for Q&A at the end of your presentation.
All right, sir.
Yeah, over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bhargav, and I'll be talking about our paper, which is titled Energy Efficiency for HDFS. We came up with this paper. Along with my teammates Abhishek Das and Sanket Reddy, came up with this paper under the guidance of our professor Bhalachandra HR. We are currently 5th semester students from PS University. So before we actually fully get into the paper, I'd like to give a small brief introduction. So in our work, we aim to reduce the energy consumed in a HDFS cluster. So our approach for doing so was to divide the cluster into two zones, which is namely the hot zone and cold zone. The hot zone to store hot data and cold zone to store cold data. Here, hot data refers to data that is accessed quite frequently, whereas cold data is accessed rarely and not very frequent. Furthermore, we're also going to talk about the algorithm we've devised for transferring data between these zones, such as when hot data goes cold or when cold data starts being accessed quite a lot. We've called this the transfer algorithm. And finally, we look at some of the results we've achieved when we've simulated this algorithm on a simulator we've used. So before getting right into it, a little bit of background. HDFS, which stands for Hadoop Distributed File System. This is a distributed file system, as in the name, that handles also different sorts of data, and it is designed to be fault tolerant and is made such that it can run especially well on commodity hardware. Moving on, we come to this hard disk drive, which is a memory storage device. It is legacy compared to the latest technology that has come up. Although this is fairly cheap, but it is quite slow and consumes a lot of energy for it to function. On the other hand, we have solid-state drives, SSDs, which is the latest technology for mass storage. This is approximately 4 times the cost of a hard disk drive, But on the other hand, it is much faster and consumes much less energy compared to HDDs. So as mentioned, we've divided a cluster into two zones. So I'm going to address all of the changes we made to the architecture in this slide called custom zone layout. The very first thing would be the hot and cold zone. As you can see here, we have these two racks. The nodes which are colored red are considered as hot zone nodes, along with the name node. And nodes which are in blue are considered the cold zone nodes. As usual, these nodes are placed inside a rack, which are again connected on top of the rack switch. And then these racks are interconnected again at core switch. Sorry, sir? Yeah, so as I was saying, these racks are again interconnected with the core switch. Again, this could vary according to the data center's network architecture. Additionally, we've created two custom block balancers, one to handle nodes in the hot zone and one for the cold zone. The idea of this is data in the hot zone could be stored at a different replication factor from that of the cold zone. Normally, you would probably keep the replication factor of the hot zone a little higher than that of the cold zone. And the additional functionality of a block balancer is such that although the blocks are replicated, they are stored in as minimal nodes as possible. So the reasoning for this is such that if blocks, when replicated, can be fit into lesser number of nodes, it's better to do so than bring up additional nodes that would consume extra energy. This being said, it does not mean that multiple replications would be stored in the same node. The integrity and placement of blocks is still kept in check. So moving on to the algorithm, a few key components to understand our algorithm. First, we have the heartbeat information from HDFS. So what this essentially is heartbeat is, in a sense, a metadata sent from a data node to a name node. And this metadata consists of information of all the blocks stored in that data node. So these data nodes send in periodic messages to the name node that provide details of the blocks inside that data node. And this interval is usually approximately 3 seconds. And what this helps the name node actually map out where blocks exist in the entire cluster. And since this has metadata of all sorts of blocks, it also consists of an important field which we consider as the last time the block was accessed. And this comes into play when we talk about the transition script. This transition script again works on the name node. This works on top of the data that comes in as metadata from heartbeats. So this transition script checks when a block was last used or rather last accessed. And if this block has been left unused for a certain period of time, a certain threshold of time, this transition script deems this block as cold and then initiates a transfer of that block from the hot zone to the cold zone. So moving on to the transfer algorithm, we've come up with two cases of the algorithm. This is when one is frequent transfer and infrequent transfer. Frequent transfer is when data in the hot zone go cold very frequently and in specified periods of time. And there's a lot of transfer occurring from the hot zone to the cold zone. And this makes use of an intermediate node called a transition node, which actually accumulates data before transferring to the cold zone. This has its own advantages and disadvantages, which we'll cover in the next few slides. And infrequent transfer is when, again, data does not go cold very frequently. It goes cold quite rarely. And here there is no need of a transition node as such. Again, this too has its own advantages and disadvantages, which we will cover. So we'll first start off with the infrequent transfer. There is no transition node here as such. So here, as and when data goes cold inside the hot zone, they are allowed to accumulate in the hot zone till they cross a certain threshold. And once this certain threshold is crossed, these blocks are then transferred from the hot zone to the cold zone by waking up nodes in the dormant cold state. The advantages of this would be that this does not require that additional node for transfer. And transfer is relatively faster because you don't have to first transfer to a temporary node and then again flush to the cold zone. On the other hand, when we have frequent transfer of data between the hot zone and cold zone, we have this one node called a transition node. So what this does is, as data accumulates in the hot zone, we don't leave them inside the SSDs of the hot nodes. Rather, we get them into the transition node, and we let them accumulate here. And once again, once this accumulation crosses a certain threshold, this is straight out flushed to the cold zone. The advantages of this would be if data is frequently transferred, you won't have to continually wake up nodes from the cold zone to transfer data. And precious SSD space from the hot zone is saved when stored inside the transition node. Again, once transfer happens between zones, we ensure that integrity of blocks is maintained such that they are not corrupted or any data is lost. And since we also have two different block balancers acting in each zone, they ensure that the replication factor is also preserved. So moving on to our evaluation results, the first thing we plotted was considering the energy consumed by the cluster as we varied hot zone percentage of the cluster. One thing to note here is, if in case the hot zone was not able to handle or was not able to store the entirety of the hot data that was required, then our algorithm defaulted back to the original functioning of HDFS and employed HDD nodes too. So we noticed that for the workload we ran, approximately about 30% of data, 30% of nodes, hot nodes were required to handle peak workloads. And if it was lesser than this, we defaulted to the default functioning of HDFS. Since SSDs are much more expensive, you would, when running a data center, you would want to minimize the number of SSDs required. And hence, this was an important plot to figure out the least number of SSDs required to run a certain workload. And again, we have, although not evident here, we have a dip from 30% till 99, but it's not quite evident due to the scale of the graph. And again, we have another significant dip between 99 to 100. This is again because there is no cold zone here at 100%. It's only made of SSDs. The entire cluster is made of SSDs. And again, there's no block transfer between zones. So this graph gives more insightful features to the previous graph. We considered a cluster lifecycle. So what a cluster lifecycle essentially is, the energy consumed when the cluster boots, the very first write of data into the cluster, the very first read, the transfer of data to the cold zone, block balancing, that is either when data is corrupted or once data is transferred between zones, and then continued read after data is transferred across zones. So the configurations we ran for the previous graph and this is that we ran a cluster we simulated a cluster with 100 nodes and with replication factor in the hot zone of 3 and cold zone as 2, and with 75,000 blocks inside the cluster. We also simulated that approximately 80% of the data goes cold after a certain threshold of time. So as you can see here, when no SSDs are employed, the energy consumed is quite high, approximately 750,000 watts. But whereas in the case of as low as 30% of SSDs is employed as hot zone, this energy consumption is dipped quite a bit. And we see that approximately almost 40% of that energy is reduced when employing our algorithm with hot zones and cold zones. Again, there is a dip between 30 to 50, but due to the scale here, it isn't exactly visible. Although very low, there is a reduction in power consumption with higher SSDs. And finally, again, with 100% SSDs, we see that, again, there is no transfer to cold zone that exists. So it is, again, quite lower. Moving on, we also plotted the variation of energy consumed by the cluster with the data amount of data in the cluster, the data size. So what we've done here is we see here with this blue graph, that blue line rather, that gives the energy consumed with the default functioning of HDFS. And for our algorithm with 30% and 100% SSDs, we see that there is significantly lower energy consumed with the amount of blocks being increased in the cluster. A key thing to note here would be these dips. This occurs when, say, blocks snugly fit in or perfectly fit into the number of nodes running in the cluster. So, for example, if we have 2 nodes with 5 blocks each, which have the blocks running at the blocks consume maximum storage, and the very second another extra block comes in, that would require another node entirely to store the block. And hence you see those, just for the storage of that one block, we have an additional node entirely. Hence those small bumps in the graph. So the next plot we have is energy consumed versus the number of nodes. So a key thing again to note here would be to vary the size. As and when we increase nodes, we put in 200 additional blocks, because if we did not put in additional blocks, we'd practically have a straight line, because all the blocks would fit into a minimal number of nodes and the rest of the nodes would be just put to a dormant or sleep state. As noticeable again from the graph, energy consumed with our algorithm while employing SSDs and with hot zones and cold zone is much lower compared to 0% SSDs with the default functioning of HDFS. So that's all I had for this slide deck. I'm open to questions now.
Thanks, Bhargav. I have one question, because you are saying that the hot zone and cold zone, and it depends on the frequency of accessing the data.
Yes, sir.
So that's what we are traditionally following. But is it really true in the sense of today? Because if you look at the data like a mobile service providers, so we always consider the latest data is more important, like last 1 week or 10 days data, than the frequently accessing like last 3 months data.
Yes, so that's
so, yeah, how that division can be happen, and then if suppose if that is a change in dynamically, so how your cold and hot zones will change in the HDFS?
Sir, the zones will remain the same. Let me just take up a picture. Yeah, here the zones would remain the same, because this essentially is defined by the memory storage device installed inside the node. But the data again could be cold or not. Like said, if you say for mobile providers, data that comes in the latest data that comes in, it is shown that it normally is accessed frequently for a certain period of time before it actually goes cold. So if it is accessed frequently, it stays in the hot zone. But if in the case where it goes dormant or that data is not accessed anymore as frequently as it used to be, then we can deem that that block as cold and then transfer it over to the cold zone. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. One more question was from J. Lakshmi. So what kind of workload diversity was considered to make this study?
We didn't characterize a lot of workloads. The one we've used was specifically, at least the ones we plotted the graphs was specific to, this configuration with 75,000 blocks and assuming 80% of data goes cold periodically.
Okay, and then I think Professor KV is also having a question. So, sir, can you ask?
I'll ask. So, Bhargav, good presentation. Bhargav, here's a question. First is does your algorithm work on a per block basis or a per file basis? Because if I look at HDFS, if somebody is accessing, you would access the file completely. It's meant for analytics, right? Meant for streaming analysis.
Yes, sir.
So I would assume that you're making a file-based decision would be more appropriate. But it looks like you're making a block-based decision.
Yes, sir. We are sticking to a block-based decision because if in case we stuck to a file-based decision, we were afraid that if in case the file was, if it consumes say 100% of one block and probably just say 10% of another block, and we'd have to store both the blocks in there anyway, because we're going to have to access the entirety of the file. Yeah. In the other case where since the 90% of that other block did not have that file being accessed, we could not drop that block entirely because data is still used there.
It's unlikely. So I think we must understand what HDFS is used for. And the second question which kind of, if you have split a file across hot and cold zones, then when an MR job is run, essentially HDFS will run MR jobs on top of it. But then these jobs will take different amounts of time. The tasks of these jobs will take different amounts of time.
Yes, so the assumption is that data that is, if the data is accessed frequently, it will stay in the hot zone. So if an MR job runs that requires data from the cold zone, it will be brought to the hot zone.
I see. You cannot run directly off the cold zone.
You could, but then that would probably it would probably take more time, and it might slow things down.
Okay, thank you. That kind of answers my questions. Let me see if there are any other questions which are there.
Yeah, there is a question from Sanket Reddy. Can you please admit him? Sanket Reddy.
Sure.
He's raised a hand.
Hi,
Yes, Sanket, please go ahead.
Yeah, that was not a question. I'm in the same team as the presenter. Like we are in the same team. I'm Sanket. I wanted to answer KVS's question. It was how much overload is there when MR job is run when required to when it requires a block from cold zone. I think it will be just as usual because our algorithm currently moves the data from the cold zone to the hot zone and then processes on it. And the thing is, according to some previous researchers which we referred to, once the data goes, usually the data, 80% of the data which is put into the HDFS goes cold after 12 days. That is usually the pattern what happens. 80% of data usually goes cold and it is usually never accessed. So that is what we consider will happen in our case too. So in the transition script, there will be a threshold of 12 days, and after that, we're going to, if the data has never been accessed till 12 days, we're just going to move to the cold zone, assuming that it's probably not going to be used again. But even if it is used, we'll move it back to the hot zone, and then again the transition script will start running on it, which will make it cold if it has not been used for 12 days. So we move that to the hot zone and then use it. So there'll be an additional overload of the block moving thing, and that's what normal processing.
Okay. There is one more question, comment coming from Lakshmi from IIC. It looks good. It may be good to look at different applications in terms of how they influence the data store and the movements. So that's maybe something on the workload that you can kind of think about. The comment that's coming from.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks to Bhargav and Sanket. Thanks. And we'll close this full paper session, and then we'll move on to the short paper session.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Krishna. We'll end this session now, and we'll start the short paper session.